we're here to talk about your movie Ed Kemper. Chad, you directed it.
Yes.
Stephen, you guys co-wrote the script together, but Stephen, where does the script start with you, Chad, or you, Stephen? And Stephen, do
Uh,
you prefer Steve or Stephen? I apologize.
Steve is fine.
Sure.
I go by Steven, but my friends just call me Steve. So,
Cool. But
um,
yeah, so the two of you co-wrote this together. Where did it start for the two of you, and how did you guys meet up to work on the script together?
well, actually, the script, the original draft of the script goes back probably 20 years or so.
Oh, oh
It
my
wow.
God.
was
Okay.
after I had some initial success with Ed Gein and Ted Bundy and Hillside Strangler. The
Oh.
co-producer Mike Muscal, he approached me about like, hey, do you have another one of these things? And of course I didn't, but I said, there are plenty of serial killers in the world. So it might have even been Mike's suggestion to do Kemper. And so Chad knows Mike separately. And at whatever point, I don't know, how exactly did it happen, Chad? Did Mike approach you, or did you ask Mike if we had the script, or?
No, Mike got back in touch. I hadn't seen him in years and years, and he got back in touch with me on Facebook and said, "Hey, you're doing a lot of these, movies. Where do you get the money? How is this working? You're doing, cranking these things out." And I said, I'll find 100 grand, shoot it in 10 days, and bing, bang, boom. If you've got the money or you got the project, send it my way, and we'll see what happens. And I had just finished Pig Killer, my first true crime film, and that was doing well. And he said, "Hey, are you interested in doing another true crime film? I've got this script here based on Ed Kemper." And I'm like, "Shoot it over." And he sent it over, and it was, usually you get these scripts and you're kind of like, eh. But this one, I knew about Ed Kemper and I knew about Stephen's work, and I was like, yeah, I can't wait to read it. Read it, it was great, and then went about trying to find money to make it.
Ain't that just the way?
It happened. It was I don't know if that's serendipitous, but necessarily, but I mean, it happened pretty much almost that quickly. It was sort of like, oh, although there it initially though I had trouble because it is like an old script. I had trouble tracking because it does not exist at the time. It did not exist as a final draft file, and I was able to
Oh.
like it. I literally it was like an old Word document,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which I was kind of amazed I was able to track it down because it literally was on like a 3/4 inch floppy disk.
I was gonna say, was it on a floppy disk?
That, that tells you
Yeah.
something about the
You
age of
were like,
that
how do I
script.
get data off of the floppy disk now? Like, I have no way. It's like,
Well, and when Mike actually when he reached out to me and he said like, "Hey, do you still have Kemper?" I felt like I was victorious finding like an actual hard copy, let alone trying to track it down on disc. So, uh, uh,
yeah.
but
So
yeah, I
this has
mean,
been a
that's
long time
almost
coming, basically.
well, and it's it's incredibly gratifying that something that I had was kind of mothballed suddenly gets pulled out of the mothball, and here we are talking about it all this time later,
That's so cool.
and it's it's the project's got some momentum behind it.
Hell yeah. So,
That's the great thing of, you forget about something, it's gone and whatever, and then it comes back and then it gets a whole new life. It was one of those things of the script was, I didn't even want to touch a word of it because it was so good, but budget constraints and other certain things,
yeah.
is basically why I even put a finger to it. But, 90% of it is definitely Stephen's work, and it was an amazing script, and it was
Well,
just a
thank you,
joy
man.
to come across it. And again, serendipitous that it happened, and it was just a joy from the first day from reading the script to finishing it, and now it's coming out to the world, and it was just a blast.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you did as I said before, man, you did a fantastic job. And I mean, everybody involved did a fantastic job.
Yeah, no, totally.
I mean, really, it's I've been around the block once or twice, and to have all of those various elements come together as well as they have in this case is fairly rare.
Yeah. But so I mean, obviously we all love true crime. It's a huge thing. Ed Kemper, I feel like, is kind of the like B tier. And it's like terrible to say B tier serial killer. Like that feels so gross to rate them like they're celebrities. But, Ed Kemper obviously is not as well known as some of the other big ones. We've seen him in Mindhunter. But so I think, Chad, especially what about, besides reading the script and it being, an amazing script from Steve, what about the Ed Kemper story do you think was interesting for you to tell now too?
Uh, it's hard to say. I mean, it was one of those things where, again, it comes down to, I knew who he was. I mean, when I was, a teenager, I had a little, or it's about that big, encyclopedia of true crime, and it had basically a little dictionary of every serial killer. And I just remember the Ed Kemper one sticking vividly in my mind about him, seeing the devil in
Yep.
the furnace. That was something that really kind of intrigued me. And when reading Steve's script, and most of it was accurate of stuff that I had read about him, and I'm like, okay, this is at least it's got the beats that I want to get into. It's got the period. The 70s is a great period to begin with. The devil and the mother and all those things that kind of interested me. It was one of those things. I had a messed up childhood, so I can relate certain aspects with Kemper. So when you can find something relatable to a character that you're working on a project, it makes it that much easier to kind of get into that mode of making something as true to what actually happened as you possibly can without, talking to Ed Kemper himself, and that's kind of what I tried to
Give him
do
a
and what I
call.
enjoyed most of it. We actually, I told Brandon Kirk to get in touch with him, and so he wrote him a letter in prison. I don't know if he's heard back from him yet, but he did try to get in touch with him.
No
Hmm.
way. He's still
Yeah.
alive. He's still alive to this
Oh yeah, he's
day.
Oh
still
yeah,
alive.
yeah. Well, and
Um,
to follow up just on that about
yeah.
about what kind of just distinguished in my mind originally Ed Kemper was the fact that most of these guys, even after they're caught red-handed and convicted, and they still kind of want to deny culpability, whereas Ed Kemper's sort of that rare serial killer that he's actually brutally, but genuinely brutally honest.
Right.
Um, you know,
True. That is very true. He is very like, yeah, uh-huh.
yeah, which is sort of inherently fascinating. Like, the pathology typically is not that. And, Ted Bundy's the guy who even made his great quote, which I'll never forget, was he said, "The thing that people don't understand about me is that I'm really a nice guy." And you're like, yeah, no, see, you can't. You don't
Right.
get to have it both ways, dude. Like, it just not.
Yeah. No. Well, and I think something I really liked about Ed Kemper is the looking at the mo at his mom. And obviously, like, she's terrible. And there's a really interesting dynamic there for lots of reasons. But I like these moments you have with her where she's like at the bar with her friend and she's trying like there's a little bit of humanity you give her in these moments. And I was curious, one, about that angle, but two, researching that, and were the like these moments something that were kind of artistic liberties? Was there research gone into that about like about her relationships outside of Ed, that kind of thing? Because that to me I had not known about in knowing Ed Kemper, and I liked that angle of his mother and making her a little bit more, a little less of a whiskey chugging monster. Uh,
Right.
Well, I mean, going back to the like when the Ed Gein that I wrote years ago was it, approaching these things, and I've heard a few people use the word sympathetic, and obviously one you don't want to look at someone like Ed Kemper as a sympathetic character, but the only thing that makes these sorts of stories interesting, though, is if you can kind of humanize the monster.
yeah.
I mean, going back to Frankenstein's monster, like part of what
Oh yeah.
Frankenstein's was that the sympathetic, he's a sympathetic monster.
Right. Right.
And so that's sort of what Ed Kemper is that there's, he's a monster certainly, but there's also a human being there who ultimately at the end of the day just wants his mom to be proud of him.
Yeah.
Right.
Wait, so was she actually like, was that friend she had and like these queer undertones question mark? Like, was that something that was real or was that kind of our liberty? I like truly, I have no idea. Like that, I thought that was an
No,
interesting
it was
angle.
one of those things that there was an interview that Ed had done with an innuendo that he had said where he suspected there was something much more going on with his mother and Sally. And especially the whole
Ooh.
thing about the trip to England was a true aspect of it, where they were
Yeah.
had a big trip planned and then she canceled the last minute. And Ed was like, "Why are you so upset about that?" I mean, it was like he knew then something else was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And back then it wasn't really something you talked
Oh
about.
no, no. I mean, the
So
two women walk into the bar and she's like, "Don't look at me. They're going to think." I'm
right,
like, "Yeah."
Mm-hmm.
so it was
Cool.
kind of expanding on that element and kind of getting, again, like you said, the more human aspect of her and the reasons, she went through three husbands and, definitely had issues with Ed. So it was trying to, kind of mine that, what kind of
Cool.
drove her to those reasons. And one of those things, her sexuality, battling that, and, whatever insecurities she had with her son, and just kind of trying to find, again, a human element to it. Like even Adolf Hitler, there's human elements to everyone, in one way, shape, or form. And it's just trying to get into those just to show people an aspect instead of, like you said, a whiskey jugging monster.
Well, and I'd love to hear about how you found Brandon Kirk as your Kemper and how that process of finding your Ed Kemper, because it's not easy to find a guy to embody a serial killer who's been embodied before in other media. So, and he's
Right.
great and a little bit freaky and a little scary. And I was like, he does an incredible job. Sorry, Brandon, in becoming a serial killer.
Yeah, no,
And I
I
he
was
really
really,
does.
yeah, I was taken a bit because there's a weird, I don't know, like charm that comes through. Like as
Sure.
he's doing these awful, awful things, but part of you can kind of be like, I could probably sit down and have a beer with that guy.
I know his smile. Like my favorite is when they're in the car with his coworker and he's like, "Are you eating egg salad? Are you crazy?" And he's like, "It's not contagious." I like those moments are just like so off-putting, but important, I think, to the character building. And I think Brandon has that a really nice smile. I think that also probably is like
Sure.
unnerving. But yeah, I just wanted to hear Chad, especially finding your Kemper and what that process was like.
Well, I had worked with Brandon on originally on a film called Nightcaller, and he was great.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then I worked with him again on, a couple other films in smaller roles and whatever. And he was always, brought his A game, knew his lines, would get naked in a heartbeat, had no problem, just top notch guy. So he was kind of in the back of my mind, even when going through when I first read
Oh,
Kemper.
cool.
So, but we auditioned, had an open call, and saw about 20 different guys. And Brandon, put in like 5 different audition tapes, and he beat them all out. And he was top notch from start to finish.
He was ready. He was ready to do all the terrible things that Kemper does.
Oh yeah, completely.
Yeah.
And
Well, and
without
like,
qualm, we had guys come in that would give a great audition, and you're sitting there talking to them and whatever, and then you go, well, do you have any problem with nudity? Or whatever, and most of them would say, well, anytime there's a bit of
Yeah,
hesitation,
yeah,
there's going to be a problem when it comes down to whether there's nudity or not. I mean, I like to kind of throw that out to just see how committed an actor will be
sure,
to
sure.
a role.
yeah,
And if some of them are going to hesitate just a little bit about showing their butt or whatever it is, forget about it, because they're going to be a nightmare on the set. Or they might be great, it might not be a problem. But if that an issue comes up where you're like, we shot half of the film and then this guy doesn't show up the next 7 days, we got to do, we're in trouble. Whereas with Brandon, he not only gave a great performance, but I knew he was 100% going to be there and give it his all. So it was kind of it was meant to be. He was just he fitted so
Mhm.
well.
well, and you also go into the like Ed Kemper had sex with dead bodies, everyone. Like it's gross. Like we're like and I was actually like, are they gonna put necrophilia in this movie? I feel like we always avoid the necrophilia. Not to say that I want
We
to see
always
necrophilia
avoid the
on
necrophilia.
camera. I promise. I swear I'm
Yeah,
not that
yeah.
weird. It's not necromantic, but it's kind of this is going to sound very strange. It's nice to see not always trying to get away from the reality. You know what I mean? I feel like
Sure.
serial killer films want to glamorize in a way, and I think these kinds of movies that show the reality of that and are like, no, no, he was a necrophiliac. I know it's gross, but Fun talking about these things professionally.
Well, it's also it's it's too, I don't know. I always found it sort of disingenuous, like a lot of the approach to serial killer things, where they either
Mm,
sort of, like the Hannibal Lecter. I mean, I love Silence of the Lambs, but like that kind of thing where you're like, right, you know, what these people do is depraved. So show
yeah,
it as
it's
such,
pretty fucked up.
as opposed to somehow sanitizing, the horrible, horrible things these guys do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what was that? I mean, for especially on set, Chad, like, was the vibe, and I'm curious, was the vibe good on set? I feel like the more fucked up movie it is, the better the vibe is on set with the actors and the crew.
Oh,
Is that all
totally.
applicable
Yeah, it
here?
was
Okay,
great.
cool. I was gonna say everyone after each take is like, yeah, and it's like the worst thing you've ever seen. Yeah, hell yeah. The
I'm
honor,
curious,
like,
Chad, when was the first time that you kind of on set that you sort of knew that Brandon was bringing it?
that's a
Oh,
good
the
question.
first day when the first scene, you're always kind of nervous of how they're going to interpret it or whatever, because there's really no time or no money for rehearsals. It's just like you get there,
Uh-huh,
you set it up, you rehearse it for camera, and it's like, okay, he's got his lines down, he's got whatever, and then when the camera's rolling, it's 100 times better. But you knew, like, the minute he just started rehearsing, and I was seeing that, I'm like, okay, this guy's going to be good.
this guy's
Hell
going to do
yeah.
it. Yeah.
I mean, and also like big props to casting who played his mom. I'm so sorry, I don't have her name. Was it?
Oh, Susan Prever.
Yes, I'm so sorry, but she's awful, and I mean that, like, especially when she's like on the door being like, he would fuck me. I was like, this
Oh
is
yeah.
fucked up. But again, incredible performance from her, and like you
Absolutely.
really did find a cast that were willing to just like throw themselves into this, like, these weird roles, and that's so cool. That's like, it's awesome. It's got to be so cool as a director to get to work with that and get to watch these people bring these nasty characters to life, you know?
Well, I think that's 90% of directing is basically just the casting and getting the right people that are 100% there, and it just makes the job so easy. And then you just sit back and watch and get excited with each take. And Susan was one who really brought her game to this. And like you said, in
Yeah.
that scene when she came out in that outfit, I hadn't seen the outfit, I hadn't seen anything, and when I saw it for the first time, sitting behind the camera, I was just like floored. It was really magical at that moment.
That's so cool. Oh my goodness.
Well, and I mean, but let's be honest, that the whole thing does sort of hinge upon their two performances. And like
Yeah.
that scene in particular, that could have really, potentially gone almost satirical in a weird way, like that.
Right, right.
Had she not done that scene correctly, uh,
Sure.
with your expert direction, obviously, but I mean, like, all kidding aside, that could have elicited laughs,
Yeah.
Right,
if
right,
it
right.
gone the wrong direction. So,
Yeah.
Well, I think that's part of it. Again, when I went to rewriting the script and adding some certain elements, it was knowing that Susan was going to be in that role and kind of tailoring it
uh-huh,
certain
uh-huh.
things. Like the original Clarnell did work at the school, but she didn't work in the drama department. That was an addition that I made, knowing that Susan, who does a lot of theater and is really big into Streetcar Named Desire and things like that, and has performed those things on stage. Adding those elements
Oh.
kind of fit her as an actor and as a person. It kind of just helped her even get more into that character, with just adding some touches like that with her real life that I knew, having worked with her before.
Uh-huh,
So it was kind of
Cool.
weaving those in, making it more a character more easier for her to kind of slide into, because they shared certain elements of real life, and with her own story.
well, it's actually really interesting you mentioned that too, because I was going to, when we were talking about the scene outside the bedroom door, I was going to specifically reference like Tennessee Williams.
Sure, sure.
That totally makes
Yes.
sense. It's like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
there you go.
Be a very interesting play to have Ed Kemper and his mother in one house for a whole thing, but that's another conversation.
I like
It's another weird thing for another time. But
it. because they were very close in real life. Those are the other things. When he went back in, he was doing an interview where they're having a late night conversation and whatever, and all those things that I'm like, well, they did have an interesting dynamic of they would have
Yeah.
these long, great conversations, and then at the same time, these berating and this hostile thing where it took a horrible turn. But at one point, it could have been a very good, if she would have given him the love and the understanding, I guess he required, it could have been a whole different dynamic.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Who knows? But so before we wrap up, Chad, you have some more serial killer type true crime films on the way, right? Can you tease anything about those?
Sure, we just finished Dorothea, which is based on Dorothea Puente, who poisoned, numerous elderly men and women in the 80s at her boarding house. And
Yes, she did.
so Dread is going to be putting that one out as well. And then I'm working on the script for The Night Stalker right now.
That's crazy. Well, more true crime to come,
More true
but
crime.
thank you. More true crime to come, but thank you both so much for chatting about Ed Kemper. Excited for everyone to see the twist you've put on this, as the poster calls American Psycho. So thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Well, thank you.